public schools. And so what we want to do is we want to redirect their focus. There is a free and reduced lunch program in the United States. We want to make sure that the schools are focused on taking the children who should be in those programs and getting them on that program, period. There's qualification processes to get on the free and the reduced lunch. But if the child simply just cannot, or if the child can pay for the lunch, then the family will continue to pay for the lunch. But if the child cannot pay for the lunch, why are we penalizing a 6-year-old, a 9-year-old, and something called shaming? I wasn't aware of that. I just knew I was very, very different when I was growing up than the other kids. And I'll get to that in just a second. But why would we shame these children? Because they carry that through the rest of their lives, whether we want to believe it or not. They see themselves very differently. Maybe some don't think they're quite as good. And I'll bet you anything, if we were to track those kids all the way to the end, they're the ones that we're seeing from a domestic violence standpoint, crime and punishment, obesity, health-related risks, teen pregnancy, all of these other things. And so I think that if we focus on feeding the children lunch, it's a very simple concept. We all get hungry in the middle of the day. I can't imagine going into the second half of my day like a battle ram trying to get things done in the state senate if I'm hungry. But I can remember those days, and I'll never forget those days. And I think you all feel the same way, or you wouldn't be here today.
Council, and that council is tasked with coming up with a statewide plan to address and hopefully one day end hunger and poverty in New Mexico. And it's something that is important to obviously everyone in this room, but also so many people that aren't here today. And I want to give you a little bit of background as to how this specific piece of legislation came to be. And I'd actually have to go back another legislative session, although we passed the House Memorial this past session, to the prior session. And you may remember a bill that was introduced and passed by Senator Michael Padilla. I believe he spoke here last year. That bill created the Hunger Bill of Rights. That is correct, and addressed a lot of lunch shaming issues that children in New Mexico specifically deal with. And one of the things that has been most surprising to me since I've been in the legislature is how little this issue of hunger is addressed or even talked about. And so it really wasn't until that piece of legislation got brought forth that we had a really in-depth discussion. And it was something that really struck home for me because as a child, I grew up in poverty. I was one of those children that never had to fortunately deal with hunger issues, but I had free and reduced lunch at different times of my life, and that allowed me to have a warm meal every day when I went to school for both breakfast and lunch. And I was one of those kids that was ashamed on a couple of different occasions. And so it was so phenomenal for the senator to introduce this legislation, and I stood in strong support and was one of the biggest cheerleaders from the sidelines to make sure that that got passed. And so it was truly remarkable. It was the first of its kind in the entire country, and I know other states have followed suit. So on the heels of that, it really got me thinking, because a lot of those discussions really centered around a lot of different issues that, again, weren't always talked about. The statistics were just staggering, and I'll read some of those for you, that 25% of children in New Mexico are at risk for hunger. Also that New Mexico ranks second among the states for childhood hunger. And also, the statistics also show that the overall hunger rate in New Mexico is 16%, ranking New Mexico 7th among the states with worse rates of food insecurity. That's just astonishing to me. And hearing those statistics, I thought, what could I do? How can I address some of these issues that so many people are dealing with here in our state? And just about that time, Ms. Sinfield, Brenda, she came and talked to me about this proposal about creating this hunger council, and it was like the forces kind of meeting together. And so we met, and together with other leaders from the Interfaith Hunger Coalition, the amazing organization that Carlos just talked about, we came up with this plan and created this council where we could bring a lot of the key stakeholders together to try to come up with a plan Because a lot of people talk about it here and there, but what are the solutions? What can we specifically do to address these problems? And there are so many amazing organizations that I know are represented here today, so thank you all for everything that you do. But what could we do to bring all of these groups together? Private, public, nonprofit, for-profit, federal, state. I mean, there's so many organizations that are trying to do the same thing, but what could we do to bring them all together? And so we have this idea of this council that would do that. So we, after some time, put it down on paper, and although we sort of did the heavy lifting from the get-go, I felt like this isn't something that I should do on my own. We need more input from other people, and I wanted to make sure that this was not just something that I was doing, but something that others from across the state could work on as well. And I also felt that it was important that we had bipartisan support, so I reached out to Joanne Ferrary, who is one of our other main sponsors. She is a state representative from Las Cruces. Unfortunately, she was not able to be here today. I know she really wanted to. Another main sponsor that we brought in was Deborah Armstrong. She too is from the Albuquerque area. And last, but certainly not least, we have Rebecca Dow. She's a representative from Truth or Consequences. And each of us brings something different to the table, not just with respect to our political affiliations, but a lot of our background and experience. And so I felt like we were a good group of people that represented some of the diversity that we have in our state. And together with Carlos and Brenda and so many other people, we've come up with a group of individuals that we're slowly trying to bring these stakeholders together and come up with, like I said, this statewide plan. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done to get this off and running. But one of the things that we really wanted to make sure that we did was that we didn't want to recreate the wheel, because again, as I mentioned, so many of you all are doing a lot of the work in your respective communities, and what could we learn from that? What could we learn from the existing organizations and programs that are already in place? And so it's our goal at some point in the future to bring these goals and ideas together and have the statewide plan and see what we can do. You know, as Brenda indicated, I'm not seeking re-election, but although I won't be up in Santa Fe as a state representative after December, you know, there are things that I know I can continue to do, and the other representatives that will continue to be there, and how we can continue to change and enact laws potentially and give funding for certain initiatives that will truly make a difference and hopefully at some point in our future end hunger and poverty in the state of New Mexico. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. There is so much being done to eradicate hunger and improve nutrition in our state, but there is so much more that needs to be done, and we see the needs in surveys in rural health that list hunger as the #1 issue that people see in their areas. And we also see in our ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. Hunger is the #1 life-sustaining problem. But we have a great hunger policy coalition of nonprofits and agencies represented here that are working together. And we also have a legislative hunger coalition to support those needs through legislation and funding. And the governor has committed Patty Keene to be our hunger czar and work with Secretary Grace of HSD and also all the other departments. But making sure that we see this as important for our children to get a healthy start in life, to also continue with their education so they can learn, and all the way through college, and for families and seniors to be healthy and prevent illnesses and be able to work. Thank you all for your great efforts and support to eradicate hunger in our state. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for being here today. It's such an honor to be an elected official and to bring the voice of my community and your communities to the state capitol. And the Hunger Council has been working during the interim to identify priorities, and some of the practical things that I think about as a lawmaker is how can we, I see the Secretary of Ag is here, and we recently learned that the average age of a farmer in New Mexico is 60 years of age. So we do have young farmers that are starting out, and they're ready to sell their crops. So we have this great farm-to-table program, and if they're lucky enough to be able to sell to a school district, they can sell their entire crop. But sometimes it's not enough. And so one of the initiatives that I'll be working on over the interim of the 60-day, I hope you guys will join me on, is adding that farm to table to include our senior mill sites in our rural communities and to include our early childhood providers. And hopefully what that will do is fully help us to buy every single piece of crop that our young farmers produce and get them into our senior mill sites that are hanging on by a thread. So for our senior mill sites to get that little bump in their reimbursement and to be able to get some more fresh food from our local community will be an economic driver for our new farmers, but also provide some security for our senior mill sites. And the same would be true of our early childhood programs. And I'm really excited to be working with PED on a pilot project in the Twinkle Consequences School District, where that school it's Title I district-wide, so the meals are free to the students. And they are partnering with the after-school sites and the early childhood programs to deliver meals to them also at no cost. So I look forward to hearing from any of you who have creative ideas that drive the economy, but also provide food security for our communities. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for being here today and elevating the issue. We can solve hunger and provide food security across New Mexico when we work together. Thank you.
Teachers, let me tell you, teachers use their own money to bring snacks into their classrooms because of the children that wind up in the schools. The other great thing we're doing, though, is that we're promoting community schools. The Roadrunner Food Bank in Albuquerque works with the community schools. They have a once a month where they set up an entire outlay of food for families at those schools, because most of those schools are in high poverty areas. So we've got the schools working, we have the food banks working, we have the Restaurant Association paying attention to this. We're trying to get some regulations in place so that we can take the food not eaten at the schools and the cafeterias or at restaurants to also be available to homeless, etc. So we're all working on it. We can't do it without every one of the organizations here, and I just have to thank you for that. We are going to hear about this a bit in the Senate today, so thank you again, and let's go forward with trying to solve this problem in New Mexico.
And they know what I'm talking about. We have a great network across the state addressing hunger, but it's not enough. And we do have several pieces of legislation that are going on. We have the money to buy produce, fresh produce for children in the schools. This year, I also tried something different. I have a bill and an amendment in the House bill to purchase fresh produce for the senior centers. And as I tell people, when you go to a senior center, it's not exactly restaurant quality food. And our seniors deserve better. And when you look at all the networks of the Food Depot and the Roadrunner and the food banks all over the state, the churches, the advocacy groups, it could be a small group handing out sandwiches in a park. It could be a group handing out bags of food to immigrants who don't want to really be identified. Let's take care of everybody. We also have had this task force on grandparents raising grandchildren, but we have expanded some of the language to many people taking care of grandchildren. It could be aunts and uncles, like I was, taking care of somebody. It could be a next-door neighbor who really cares about that person. It could be a niece taking in a niece. But we really want to support the extended network that's necessary to take care of our children. And bless you for doing what you've done with your grandchild. It's very hard, and I appreciate everything that you went through, all the struggles. The backpack program should not be discontinued. If you're associated with the that's been working on that. Please keep it going. I think that there